excited for this conversation because it's been a long time coming.
Oh my gosh, it feels like we've been talking about it for the last year.
Absolutely. Well, look, let's go straight into this. Thank you for joining me, and welcome, Zara, and welcome everyone to the Brown Girls Rising conversation with myself, Minaxi Mistry, and of course, Zara, award-winning, TV, radio, podcast presenter. Good God, the list goes on, Zara. Yeah, shall we just do a little quick intro? Would you like to go first?
Of course, thank you. Oh my goodness, having an elevator pitch I found really difficult because I think working as a multi-hyphenate, and that's a term that was coined by a business journalist called Emma Gannon. And it's sort of for one site, I heard this term and I thought, great, I can finally, hopefully reasonably quickly mention what I do, which is lots of things. So I'm broadly work across creative sectors, journalism, and the media. But I like to say that storytelling is a thread that runs through absolutely everything I do, from writing columns to presenting programs, as you mentioned, to even teaching others how to deliver keynote presentations. I do a lot of writing, storytelling, comedy. I write sitcoms, TV shows. I'm an actress. So there is quite an exhaustive list. And being a multi-hyphenate, a broadcast multi-hyphenate, I think just helps people to understand what I do.
Well, I have to be honest. Well, thank you firstly for sharing a little bit about you. I actually had to go and Google what multi-hyphen meant.
That's okay.
Well, I've
Perfectly
learned
reasonable.
something new. I've learned something new. A little bit about myself. Minaxi Mistry, founder of Equality Leaders, and after having spent many years in the corporate world doing D&I, I just wanted to do it another way, making it into an everyday culture through the learning lens. And so, delighted to be here. Zara, shall we go straight into this?
Absolutely.
Look, we've sat on the NatWest Ethnicity Advisory Council for about 5 years together, and we've just embarked upon another year together as well. And I've always admired each other's achievements from afar. Yeah. And today, as brown women, we're navigating life, between the roles that we play. And today we're going to have a really unapologetic conversation, I feel, a very honest conversation, that goes beyond our, individual journeys, speaking to our challenges, that status quo, breaking those barriers, how we've broken those barriers, and, and how we're lifting each other as we kind of rise, and where we kind of find ourselves today. I do have a trigger warning. If there is anybody in the audience today, I'm going to be sharing a part of my life I have actually never spoken about publicly. So if anyone here in the audience today is affected by bereavement, this is your moment to leave the webinar today. Great, cool. So Zara, we've spoken a lot about childhood and what has shaped us. We speak a lot about how we have fond memories, and equally we have a lot of life challenges too. I'd love to hear more about your childhood. We've often spoken about that piece around belonging and fitting in. What I want to know is, can you recall that very first moment you realized you were different, if I may allowed to say that? Why was that, and what made you feel that way?
Oh, thank you, Minaxi. I mean, it's funny because we have spoken about childhood a lot, and I think everyone does, because it's our reference point for life, and it's those formative years that really sort of shape who we are. But my mother is a Glaswegian. She's from the East End of Glasgow, from a place called Brigton, which sounds a lot like Bridgerton, but it is a far cry from like classically performed Ariana Grande soundtracks. It's definitely nothing like Bridgerton. My dad is from Pakistan. And I think coming from a mixed race background and having that mixed dynamic, especially because we were raised as Muslims, that sort of made me stand out and feel very different. I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. I was different when I was at mosque. I was the only white person. I was often called Gora, the white person at mosque. People, it's slightly a disparaging term to use, but then I was at school and people would say, that I smelled like curry. I remember that coming from someone that I was in maths class with, and it made me so self-conscious because although my family are mixed. My mother, she learned to cook South Asian food, and that is sort of our home food. She's been cooking that now for 45 years, which is wild. But it was something that I became very aware of. I was wearing a headscarf after school to go to mosque. Often people would see that and they would ask lots of questions or make fun of that because it was different. Any sort of point of difference when you're younger, and this was in the 80s and 90s in Glasgow, so any point of difference I think was highlighted, and it's just the way we are as children. But I felt different from a young age. I didn't feel like I ever fitted in, and I had really terrible mental health issues when I was very young, and I don't know where that came from. It was a whole mix of just childhood angst. I mean, I have to do a special thank you and shout out to Travis, the band, because they were the soundtrack to my sort of formative years of adolescence and that teenage angst. I would sit listening to Driftwood on repeat. I felt very different then. And I think that there was anxiety building about who I was and who I was meant to be, and, not feeling like I had found my place in life. I just wanted life to begin. And I remember sort of lying in bed when I was very young and sort of looking up at night. If I woke up, I would sort of have these, I think I could see spiders and things all over my room. I mean, it was a really odd sort of childhood anxiety. I was just utterly terrified. I mean, I would never have imagined then, if you told me today that I was speaking in front of tens of thousands of people on stages all around the world, that I would ever have believed that, because it felt like I couldn't even, I mean, I didn't even want to look strangers in the eye. I was so painfully self-conscious and self-aware. So my childhood was, I feel like there was lots of angst and lots of anxiety, lots of happy times as well. I had a great family, and I'm still, I'm very close to and very grateful for the fact that, that is a privilege that we don't talk about enough. Having a good family, having great support. I think family traditionally seem to be taken for granted. And actually, when we talk about privilege, it's financial privilege. But, we didn't grow up with lots of money. But and private education, we didn't have that, but I do have a family that love me. And I think that's something that, obviously money can't buy. And I see the value of that more and more as I get older. But I know that you had also differences growing up, and you felt different. What was your family like when you were growing up, Minaxi?
I mean, thank you for sharing that. And every time I feel I speak to you, I'm learning something new about you, Zara. And I think I could definitely resonate with the conversation around the food and the curry. And when you are different and you live in a predominantly a different community, that smell of the curry that wafts down your street immediately makes you feel like, oh my good God, you are different. A different household down the street. And of course, music absolutely shaped who I am today. It was a big part of, Wham was a big part of my life growing up.
Great
And
music taste, Minaxi. I love a bit of Wham.
yes, absolutely. George Michael and Andrew originally were my heartthrobs growing up. But look, I grew up, and I say we had, siblings, grew up in a very, very large household. My dad, mum, came from Africa with very little, and we cooked curries at home. We watched Indian movies. We had grandparents. We had extended family that always came and stayed with us. So I knew that we were very different from a very, very young age. And I knew that the color of my skin was different. The food my mum cooked was very different. The clothes that my mum wore were different because she would wear her traditional Indian outfits. And parents worked really hard to kind of integrate into society. Some of the stories that my dad shares with me and my siblings about how they had to fit in, they are actually quite shocking as to what happened back in those days. So what I want to actually share with you today, Zara, is I have a very big part of my life that has become a void. And this is the very first time I'm actually publicly going to talk about this. When I was around 4 or 5 years old, and these are some of my very, very early memories of being a young child, I remember losing a brother. My mum gave birth, and within 5 minutes of my mum giving birth, I recall she lost my brother within 5 minutes.
Oh, so
His name was Parish. He was born on the 24th of May, 1972. But yet, I know nothing about my brother because as a family, it's a topic we just don't speak about bereavement. We don't speak about my brother. And so as a young girl, it really did kind of impact me. And back then I was about 4 or 5 years old, and that's the memory that I can recollect. But what's happened is as I got older, I became more curious. I had a lot of questions that I wanted to ask my parents. Mum didn't really want to talk about it. I understand that. But again, those conversations with the family just didn't quite happen. And to be honest with you, about 10, 15 years ago, I discovered that we don't even know where his place of burial is because he's been moved. And I find that quite difficult to deal with. And so there are all these kind of underwritten rules and silent agreements that I feel I've grown up and I've had to abide by. And so today, as a mother, as a wife, as a business owner, I really, really do value the importance of communication, talking, that conversation, those transparent ways of doing things so that we can better understand one another. Because in those absence of words, the words that I can't find from my mom, that silence that lingers on, I have to keep searching for those answers in the quiet. And I struggle with that.
There's a sort of lack of closure there, isn't there, with so many questions that you must have for your mother and your family in terms of even the impact it had on her. And
Absolutely.
do you think that's typical of sort of South Asian families or people from your background, others that have a similar ethnicity or dynamic there, that they're just not opening up and talking about these
Yeah,
things? How is that?
yeah. Cultural nuances absolutely
Mm.
play a very big part in all of this, Zara, because it's not only the conversation about bereavement, but actually within our community, we don't also talk about menopause, for example. It's a subject that Mum never spoke about it. I knew she was
You're
going
very good
through
at
it.
talking about it, though. I know that you've mentioned it.
I am.
You're very open about it, and I admire and respect it so much because you just let everyone know if I go off on a tangent or if I forget what I'm saying or this is how I'm feeling today. And I think that's really empowering, actually, for other people as well who are going through it.
Well, I mean, I would say that my menopause walks into the room before even I do. And so I think it's really important for those people that are surrounded by me that perhaps my abnormal behavior is not normal. It's because I might just be going through something that moment. And it is something that, as a person that's going through menopause, I can't control, Zara.
No, of course. I would say similarly, mental health is something that I feel we don't necessarily openly address. And I think that sort of, when I was younger, added to an element of shame because, on one side, I had a mother who'd grown up in the very tough side of Glasgow, the East End of Glasgow,
Mm,
mental health issues. Remember, I'll
yeah,
give you mental health issues. That's what she used to say. She did give me mental health issues, but it wasn't what she was suggesting. But there was just an expectation of getting on with things, which, in some respects I think is great, but there wasn't a big appetite for what was called navel gazing. So, you
Mm.
know, that introspective, can we talk about how we're all feeling? That felt very Americanized, very Hollywood. It just
Yeah.
wasn't what we did. And so even the idea of going to see, you know, a doctor to speak to someone about that, it wasn't ever raised in the house. And it was something eventually that did pass with me. And, you know, my mental health is top notch these days,
Mm.
but and I have great resilience. But I
Yeah.
would say that was really tough growing up. It's amazing that culture of silence that exists around some of these issues and the shame that you feel as a result of that.
Yeah, and that silence actually continues. And growing up, I recall that there was a young lad that lived up our street, always walked up and down our street. We lived at the kind of tail end of a park, and people always referred to him as the mad boy, and that was his kind of nickname. But actually, if we fast forward to today, we understand that as mental health. And I think back in the day, the education wasn't there and the language wasn't there, and today we have that. And so we've absolutely got to embrace, the education that we now have and the language that we now have around mental health,
Mhm.
and whatever shape or form that may be in, to help others and to be able to identify mental health with those early trigger signs.
Yeah. What I find incredible about you, Minaxi, though, is that you took this experience that deeply affected you when you were growing up, and it's actually impacted how you are as a leader and how you operate in your business. And you had 25 years in the corporate world before you even launched your business. It would be good to know from you a little bit about the challenges that you faced, what some of maybe the most powerful lessons were that you took from starting a business after being in the corporate world for such a long time?
Oh my good God, where do I even start with that question, Zara? Look, from the bottom of my heart, I know I gave it all, yeah, and more in the corporate world, and just did not have any life kind of left in me to continue. About 5, 6 years ago, and look, some may know this. 32 years ago, it was that one moment that changed everything for me, that fueled my commitment to creating workplaces that works for everyone, right? For every characteristic. And so launching my business was, not an easy decision. Besides having to kind of reinvent myself, and I felt I had to reinvent myself. Look, I was turning 50, in the late kind of 2018, 2019, totally menopausal, 5 years into the journey with very little help. World events, like, we are in complete world disorder at the moment. This was all happening 5 years ago with Brexit, COVID, the murder of George Floyd. And there I was setting up a business in absolute chaos. And in my head, that's what it felt like to me, setting up a small business in absolute chaos. I am more sure than ever before that the entrepreneurial journey, that I have now gone on, is the right one for me, because you see, the workplace in the 90s and in the noughties were not built for people like me, right? I didn't see people like me climbing the ladder. I didn't see people like me in places, in decision making places, and I didn't see people like me being given the opportunities, like they have today. And so the biggest challenge I faced in the place of work, and again, I am now, I can talk about this. It was a very difficult part of my life, was bullying and harassment. And actually, it wasn't even in the obvious way. It was subtle. It was hard to name, Zara. It was actually also impossible to ignore, and done in such a way that it was difficult to even put into words. And actually, it completely wrecked me. And so now, when I look back at what I could have, should have done, um, I think the most important lesson I've taken away was that I was worth more than the fear that I lived in. For me, the lesson was remaining silent is never an option. And I remind myself all the time, own your voice, learn to speak up, because I learned this skill very, very late in life. Did I ever imagine I'd run my own business? No. You'd asked me that 10 years ago. No, not at all. Did I ever imagine that I would be able to break through all of this noise and be able to work with some of the world's biggest organizations, such as, NatWest, that you and I share our passion, Pepsi, Navy, Kellogg, Sky? No, I didn't ever think that would be possible. Did I even ever imagine sitting on the task force of the NatWest Bank, advising them on their racial equity journey? No. And did I ever, imagine creating really great partnerships between global brands and charities and making a lot of money for them? Part of my fundraising work that I've done. And so what I did, Zara, is I took a very, very low moment in my life and turned adversity into an opportunity for myself. And that's how my journey from being that brown girl living in a small town, from an employee to a consultant, to now running my business and on my terms. But it hasn't been an easy journey, and it still isn't. But I'm on the road. I'm doing it.
But you're such a great example of that triumphing through adversity and over it. It's not something, sadly, a story that everyone can share. I don't think everyone has the tenacity or even the know-how and the approach, the confidence perhaps to fight their way through some of that. Your story could have been completely different. It could have ended very differently to what it has. And actually behind that, I'm sure there's lots of people who championed you and helped you, but ultimately, you're on your own, aren't you? And I feel like that's often the message with women, is that we feel we are on our own to fight through things. To hear what you went through at work, I mean, I know you haven't gone into much detail about it. It's the worst thing. We spend most of our lives at work, and to be in a position of being bullied or in a place where you're dreading work, and people often talk about the Sunday blues. Imagine having it 5 days a
Yeah.
week. It's just horrendous what that must do to impact you and your mental health and your confidence in your career. You've done
Oh,
amazing.
absolutely. Thank you so much. It wasn't an easy road, but look, I'm on the path to recovery now, and I look forward to the future ahead. But, from a distance, Zara, I admire you. You've built a business just like me with a multi-hyphenate career, seamlessly. That's what it looks like. Seamlessly blending those different roles and passions that you have.
Yeah.
When did you first recognize that a portfolio career was the right path for you? Did you ever anticipate risks, challenges, and opportunities it would create for you? What does that
Well,
look like for you? I want to know about your career.
What can I say? I feel like I got sacked a lot, Minaxi. I wasn't very good in the corporate world and in keeping a job. And the reason for that, as I look back, and which I'm glad I can now, I mean, I was sacked a ridiculous, an inordinate number of times. And I hate to bring gender into this, but I seem to have been very unfortunate when it came to male bosses. I really did always seem to be able to develop more of a rapport and find great mentors in the women who were leaders in my life. But I wasn't fitting in. And this is the problem, and this has always been the problem, is, look, we set up these professional lives. We talk about our careers. We have put labels on things because it's easier to understand when we label something. But ultimately, careers and jobs, they're man-made construct. And I'm purposefully using the term man-made because it is designed for men. It was designed for men. That the workplace was very male-dominated until relatively recently. Let's not forget that. Women, even my grandmother's generation, she had to ask my grandfather to sign off permission for her to open a bank account. And that's crazy to me that was just my grandmother had those experiences in comparison to myself. So I never felt like I wanted to just do the one thing. And every single job I ever had, I always thought, what's next? And I was always doing courses. So I was learning Photoshop or learning camera work, or, whenever I was in something, I never felt fulfilled. This was what I was chasing, fulfillment ultimately. And I remember even when I got what would be considered, I guess, a dream job, presenting a daytime TV show on Scottish television. And the day I started, I remember my friend from university said to me, "Well, this is it. You must be made up." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm excited, but also, I think I'll probably do this for a couple of years, and then, maybe I'll look to go." And she said, "Why can't you just be happy where you are? Why can't you just enjoy the moment?" And I thought, it's just not in my nature, and it's not about not being content. I needed more. I needed to fulfill these creative parts of me, the practical side of me. I wanted to continue developing and growing, which I think is human nature. Certainly for me, it is. I feel like I'll always have lifelong learning instilled within me. And I hope that I'm still, maybe when I'm 80, I might do a welding course at college. I don't know. That's kind of what I would like to be. So I realized fairly early on that I was, they talk about a square peg in a round hole, and I learned that there was the most complex geometric shape, which is a rhombocacidodecahedron. I think I've said that right. And I thought, well, that's maybe what I am. That's maybe what I am. That's what I get. So I thought, listen, if I'm going to do this, there's no employer in the world that's going to be happy, with me moonlighting or saying, why don't I take this day off and I'll make it up. Holidays, they didn't mean anything to me. I was using all my holiday allowance to do other work. My father loved that. Mashallah, he'd say, "That's great. I'm glad you're taking time. You're working hard. You're working more." But my employer hated it, and actually, it wasn't great, because eventually I was, going to burn out doing essentially two different jobs, spending weekends and evenings doing other work. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? A great opportunity came up for me to host a podcast, and financially it put me in a position of freedom where I was able to say, I have a bumper for X number of months and I'm just going to become self-employed. But it, for me, was always about saying yes to the things that absolutely terrified me, that honestly made me feel like my stomach was going to fall out my backside. If something scared me that much, then I would always say yes to it. So I very quickly went from being a journalist to working in television, to then doing stand-up comedy, and then writing comedy and writing sitcoms and hosting events and TV shows. And there's just all sorts of things that I do now. I'm an actress, and actually have a really exciting role coming up, which I can't say anything about sadly at the moment, but there's a new TV series and I've got a role and I'm very excited about it. And all of it happened just from saying, I think this is good for me because I find it slightly terrifying, and or I would love to find a way of doing this or reaching this goal. And saying yes to things just made my career go off in so many different directions. Posting about it, actually doing a lot of, Arnold Schwarzenegger said, I don't know if you saw his documentary, was it last year on Netflix, maybe it was the year before, and he said, early to bed, early to rise, work like hell, and advertise. And I got it. He took advertising, his TV shows and his films, really seriously. And actually with Terminator, he was right at the forefront of all of the advertising. He saw it as part of the job. And some of what I do, especially now, is making sure I'm putting it out there and telling the world what I do. But it has meant that I found a place that I feel like I fit in, and I fit in lots of different places, which I didn't expect to. I thought I just didn't fit in, and so I would do lots of stuff. But I've found lots of communities of people within these pockets of what I do that also do lots of things. I think this is how most of us are designed. We're designed to do lots of things. We're designed to find our own paths, and I feel quite, I think, empowered by the fact that I have this much freedom.
You sure do. And to me, it comes across as though what you thought was going to be a side hustle, the podcast, has led you to having this portfolio career. And in that journey, you must have been in places of discomfort to find
Every
your
day.
comfort.
I
every day, right?
Tony Robbins quotes, I love his quotes. One of them is that the quality of life you have is in direct proportion to how much uncertainty you can comfortably deal with. And I really like that because I feel like most days I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Earlier this week, I was hosting a conference on impact investing, and I seem to have found a bit of a niche with in the finance sector, which just involves doing lots of research and having to learn whole new languages, which incidentally I do feel that finance and finance speak should be on Duolingo because it is another world. But yeah, I feel uncomfortable a lot of the time, but I think it's a little bit addictive, feeling
Yeah. I mean,
overwhelmed.
I find myself in a place of comfort, in a place of discomfort, sorry, every day. And if I'm not in a place of discomfort, there's something wrong. There's something not right. And I need to be challenged every single day. And that's what gets me out of bed. And that's where I want to be. And as an entrepreneur, you're always looking for the next thing. You're always looking for that next opportunity. You're always looking for that next gap in the market. You're always looking to fill a void somewhere, right? And so for me, my long-term goal, ideally, I'd love to have a portfolio career like you, Zara, doing different things that I absolutely enjoy.
But you're already doing lots of things,
Kind of, yes, yeah.
You're sitting on the Ethnicity Advisory Council, you're running your own business, you're hosting events. I
Yes.
mean, I'm already seeing these strands develop quite quickly.
Yes, there's a lot going on. There is a lot going on. Absolutely. Absolutely. Do we have any questions? Let's have a quick look. Ala has just said that resonates with me so much of being able to discover several sides to your personality, embrace the fact that I am one thing. Yeah, we are one human being.
That she's not one thing.
Yeah, and that she's not
Yeah.
one thing. Absolutely, yeah.
I love that so much, Alap. Yeah, we're not one thing. And I think, women especially, we're used to adapting to different roles. I mean, I'm not a wife and a mother, but I know that often friends of mine talk about even that, having to be different in different settings and adapting themselves and, being many things to many different people. And so if we can do that in our personal lives, it just makes perfect sense to me that we do it in our professional lives as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've always found that I've always had to adapt around family and community.
Yeah.
Because if I am outspoken, or that's not what we do. If I do give my opinion, oh, but that's not, we don't give opinions at home. We stay quiet.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to find that one person that I am, that I can be consistent between work, home, family. And that's a challenge
Yeah.
because as a brown girl, I'm always having to adjust, adapt, and flex depending on who I'm around.
And that's actually a great strength. It's so the basis for one of the ideas I have at the moment for a screenplay that I'm working on, and it is this fact that quite often when you grew up with mixed backgrounds or you grew up different, you sort of have to change a little bit depending on your audience. And we talk about this in television all the time, know your audience and adapting for that. I come from Glasgow, which is, a place where people very proudly talk up their consistency. I am who I am, no matter who I'm talking to. I'll be exactly the same. And whilst I admire it, I also think I could never be that. I definitely change. It's like a chameleon. We become in different settings, we to try and fit in. And there's nothing negative about that. I think that's really positive, actually, to know how to speak to different people from different backgrounds and different audiences and to make them feel comfortable enough to open up to you. It's definitely what's got me to this career that I'm in now.
Right. We've got a question that I'm going to read out from Mina Anand. Really enjoying the conversation. what are the career barriers you are both seeing when you meet other brown girls? Do you want to take that? Do you want to go first? And
You
then I'll
can
go
take this
second.
one. I feel like I've gone first so often, Minaxi. It's over to you on this one.
Okay, so what am I seeing at the moment? I'm seeing a lot of brown girls um, not having their sense of community. Where do we belong? Because there is a camp for girls that may look from a specific community. There is a camp for girls that are maybe from another community. And I don't want to kind of start calling out communities here, but the space for brown girls and South Asian girls, I, for myself, have never found that platform. So I think brown girls are really struggling to find their community, their place, and where they actually belong. And what does that community to them look like?
That's interesting. Yeah, I talk mainly from a television perspective because that's sort of where I see the most inequality. And it's no secret that there is just no diversity at all in television. Even, when it comes to um, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, there is a huge number of people who come from private education in particular, and
Mm,
trying to remember some of the stats, but in terms of breaking through into the industry, the expectations are you give up a lot of free time, you work for free essentially to try and get enough credit so that you can actually get a job. And even when you're in those jobs, and particularly I saw working in London on very big programs, the antisocial hours and the expectations of time don't always permit for people who have caring responsibilities to break into that. So if you don't have the financial support, if you don't have the money there initially so that you can say, I'll give up 2 months, I can work for free essentially for 2 months, I've got family security, I've got financial security, that means that's fine. Or I've got family even that live in London. It's expensive, it's very expensive even to try
yeah.
and break through into the sector. But then once you're there, I noticed there was one Muslim member of staff I was working with who was also a caterer for her mother. And I saw that when, we would work 15-hour shifts, sometimes 12 to 15-hour shifts. And when I would finish at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we would have to be back in at say 5:30 for the program to begin. So we would just have enough time to go home, maybe a couple of hours sleep, and then we'd be back in. While we were all doing that, she was having to go home and make meals for her mother the next day, and look after her mom and do a bit of tidying up, and then she was coming back in. And I thought, this is where there are major issues in the equity. And we talk about, is someone having to do more work just to do essentially the same job? And that is what I see quite a lot of, because therefore the access routes are not there. You're not told, you don't see people like you doing it. You're not told it's possible. It's not accessible. And even when you're in it, you have to work bloody hard, and much harder than everyone else, which isn't fair. So those are the kinds of things I'm seeing, which I think from your perspective, in terms of having having people from your community. I'm even thinking now during Ramadan, I mean, how do you do those long hours, those
Yeah.
unrelenting hours? It's not an industry that's very forgiving for that.
I mean,
So
I recall a time in my life where I would have to wake up at 4:35 in the morning, cook dinner for a particular person, um, be at my desk for 9, do a whole day's shift work, be back home for 7, cook dinner again, and then be back up again at 4:35 to cook dinner. I mean, it went on relentlessly for years, and yet no one actually knew that side of my life. They saw me, the 9 to 5 girl working, but what actually happened outside those hours, how I managed to bring my day together, only I will ever know that. And again, it goes back to South Asian girls, South Asian women struggling. because of it's a taboo subject. It gets silenced. It's the expectation. And you then don't have a place where you can go to as your community to have that conversation and how to break those barriers.
Mm-hmm. You're
And
right.
yet I was
You
still
need that.
expected to work,
Yeah.
bring the money home, pay the bills, but also you've also got to live in a certain way where you are having to adjust and adapt and fit in because there are certain members of family who have certain requirements.
Mm-hmm. And it's those unique challenges, isn't it? I mean, everyone has them, and you don't have to come from, an ethnic minority background
Yeah.
to experience some of these challenges. Um, and I'll say it again, the privilege of having a great family is wonderful, but also to recognize that we do have unique experiences. We all have different backgrounds, and I think when you're going into an industry that perhaps has a disproportionate number of privately educated individuals, there's an expectation there that people can behave in a certain way, that people's lives are set up in a certain way that's perhaps more forgiving to long hours and the kinds of stresses that you mentioned. So it's I love that we're having these conversations now, though, because I'm not sick of talking about them. I think it's really important to champion other people and to recognize and look what are people ask what are people's challenges, what are you going home to, what's life like at home. We're not asking it enough.
Absolutely. Zara, look, it's coming up to 11:12. We've got a couple of minutes left. What's your one piece of advice that you might want to give someone who's listening in today? A thought, a comment, I don't know, anything that you want people to leave with today. If you've got...
Well, I would think back to what maybe I would tell myself when I was younger. If I could go back and say, this is what you should do, or, give myself a bit of advice that's just going to make the journey a little bit easier. And it's not to
Yeah,
so much about everything, just to have a bit more action, do more and think less in some respects. We get so caught up questioning ourselves, wondering whether we're good enough, whether we've got enough skills. What life has taught me in abundance is the more action that exists in my life, the more I just do things, the better the result. The more I sit pondering and thinking and worrying and questioning, the less that seems to come of that. And as an example, when I moved to London, I was made redundant from STV and I moved to London.
yeah,
And I had always wanted to write, and I had an idea for a sitcom. Now, I could have taken a course in screenwriting. I could have gone and done workshops. I could have spent an inordinate, painstaking amount of time trying to work out the mechanics of it all and how to structure and how to write. I could have wasted years, essentially, is what I'm saying. But instead, I saw the BBC Comedy Writers' Room was open for submissions. I could just write something and whack it in. It was the audacity of me to do that was unreal. However, I did. It was my first screenplay I'd ever written. And it was accepted. I got into the comedy writers' room, and there were thousands of applications. They chose 12 people that year, and I was one of them. And it taught me a really valuable lesson, which is do more, action it, turn your ideas into something tangible. Don't sit on them for too long. So that's the advice I
yeah,
would. What about you?
yeah. And just get on with it, right? Just get on with it and start anywhere. It might be messy, but start somewhere. And it's not perfect. I think for me, if I was to think about my younger self, I would say never be silent. Always be curious. Always ask questions. Of course, you can talk in the politest way, but silence is never an option, and that is one thing that I learned. I was silent for such a long time. I mean, even today I get told by certain people that, oh well, your opinion doesn't belong here, and you need to be silent on that opinion, and actually we don't want your. No, I'm going to give my opinion because I think it does matter, and as long as we do it in a respectful way, right? As long as we do it in a respectful way, I think our voice does belong. And so find your voice as quickly as you possibly can, and don't be afraid to do that. Oh my good God, we could carry on for longer, couldn't we? But I think our time is up, Zara. I just want to say thank you,
Thank you.
for being such a great I don't know what to say now. Panelist, and I just want to say thank you for everything that you do for me. You may not know it, but from a distance, I'm always and always learning from you, Zara. And so thank you for the little moments. Those little moments, whether it's like round the table at NatWest, or whether it's a moment whilst we're having a coffee or a drink, you're always inspiring me. And I just also want to say thank you to everyone that's made this session possible today.
Thank you so much, Minaxi, and thank you everyone, and happy International Women's Day.